I'm going to be sharing several dreams and visions that God has given me over the years. This first dream is a dream I had, oh, gosh, y'all, it's been probably over 10 years ago. And I have been sitting on this dream asking God to give me the interpretation. But He couldn't give me the interpretation back then because there was something else that needed to happen, which I'm going to show you. It recently happened, and there was something else I needed to understand about the Magog War before he could give me this interpretation. But over the past few weeks, he started showing me what it meant. And then about 2 nights ago, he just completely downloaded all this stuff into my mind, and I went, what? I mean, I see it plain as day, and y'all are going to see it too. All right. So this first dream, it happens in 4 different stages. The first scene is I'm in a place called Charleston, South Carolina, and I knew in the dream I was in Charleston. There was an angel who was standing right beside me, and I was staring at a closet inside of a vacant house. And when I say vacant, I mean vacant. Nothing in the house. And I'm staring into this empty closet, and there's nothing there. And in the dream, I knew that every single house in Charleston was vacant. And I knew that it was because these people had been forced to evacuate. And in the dream, I knew that this was a permanent evacuation. Like these people were never coming back. Okay? Now, the next thing I saw was I looked up and there was water coming from the ceiling, and big old drops of water. And in the dream, I was telling myself, this can't be a tsunami, because the power of a tsunami would have wiped the house completely out. The house would have been totally destroyed. So I was wondering why there was water coming through the ceiling of this house. Well, then the scene changes, and I find myself in Greenville, South Carolina. Now, I have family who lives in Greenville, South Carolina. Well, they live right on the edge of Greenville, but it's still Greenville County. And I was at my aunt's house, and while I was at her house, we were in the backyard, and there was a torrent, I mean, just a massive flood of water that came through her backyard, and it formed a whirlpool. And she was desperately holding on to the railing of her back steps, trying not to get sucked in by this whirlpool. And in the dream, I kept telling her to let go, let it take you, let go, let it take you. And then the scene changed again. And this is where things got a little crazy. I was walking down the road, and the angel was on my right-hand side, and we're walking down this road, and I look over to my left, and I see a man and his son playing baseball on a baseball field. But everywhere I looked was white. And I asked the angel, I said, hold on, why is it snowing in July? And I specifically said July, and that's going to be important later. And the angel said, no, it's not, this is not snow. And when the angel said, this is not snow, I looked down and I realized I was wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and the father and his son were both wearing shorts and t-shirts. And the angel said to me, this is nuclear fallout. And I went, huh? I looked at that angel so crazy. I was like, Why in the world are they playing baseball in nuclear fallout? Well, then we kept walking down the road, and as we were walking down the road, I found myself on a bicycle. But I couldn't go anywhere. I couldn't make progress because the land itself started going up and down, up and down. It's kind of like a float in the middle of the lake. You know how a boat will come by and make waves, and your float just goes up and down with the waves? That's what the land was doing, and my bicycle wouldn't go anywhere. So I got off the bicycle and I tried to start walking, but the land was so soft and going up and down with the waves, I couldn't make any progress. So I looked around and I realized that I was standing on a piece of land that was out in the middle of the ocean by itself. And I knew in the dream this land had broken off. And I'll explain this later, but it had broken off from the mainland and was out in the ocean by itself. This piece of land is called the Isle of Palms, and it's right outside of Charleston, South Carolina. It's a place that I think is absolutely gorgeous, and I love going there to visit. And I turned and looked back, and you couldn't see the mainland anymore. It was completely gone. Okay? The Isle of Palms is only connected to the mainland by a bridge that you have to cross, but don't miss the point of what I'm going to tell you in the dream, okay? Well, then the scene changed again. I was back in Charleston, South Carolina, but this time I was in a different house, and just like all the other houses at the beginning of the dream, this house was completely vacant. I knew that all the houses were vacant. I knew everyone had been evacuated. So I said to myself, well, I might as well get ready to go too. But I felt weird saying that. I'm like, I started hearing voices of people talking, and they were saying, we better get ready to go. We better get ready to go. And I was like, well, I guess I better get ready too. So I looked down, and there was a suitcase in my hand. And I was like, okay, well, I'm going to start packing this suitcase. But when I picked it up and opened the suitcase, I realized it was already packed. And I was in the dream, I was confused. I was like, wait a minute, what? Why am I already packed? And then the dream ended. Now, I got to share a few more dreams and visions with y'all before I can give you the interpretation and put all this together. Several years ago, I had a dream that I was riding through a pumpkin patch, like this big harvest field, like this fall time harvest festival field. And I got to a point where I met some people. I stopped my truck and I started talking to these people. And I knew in the dream, based on some of the people that I saw there, that this was Halloween, because the people that were in the dream are people that I had gone to a Halloween festival with, and that's what God brought to my memory. And He did that in the dream. Well, I'm in this pumpkin patch and this festival harvest field, and I'm talking to these people about Jesus, and all of a sudden we hear something in the distance. We hear this loud sound, and everybody's going, what is that? What is that? And I'm standing there going, I'm about to go home. I'm about to leave. We're going home. And I started telling people, it's the rapture. We're about to go home. But I was a little bit confused in this dream because I couldn't figure out why we had heard this trumpet, but I was saying I'm about to go home. Okay? And I knew that this trumpet was blowing on Halloween. All right, so keep that one in mind. Now, I had another dream where I was inside of my brother's house, and my brother and his wife, they live in Tennessee. All right. I was in their house, and I was about to make a phone call, and I looked out the window and I saw just a huge amount of whirlwinds all over the place, just tiny little whirlwinds everywhere. And I hung up the phone and I ran outside to go tell my brother and his wife, hey, the rapture's happening. It's happening right now. And I was explaining to them what was going on, that Jesus had come, he was taking us home, he was harvesting the earth. And while I was talking to my brother and his wife, these airplanes flew over, and these planes were flying wing to wing. I mean, they were covering the sky like a blanket. And I knew when I looked up that these were Russian airplanes. And they were shooting millions of bullets everywhere, but the bullets were not harming us. And I couldn't figure out why the bullets were not harming us. Okay? Now keep that one in mind. Now, several years ago, I had a vision. In the vision, I knew it was Passover. And God showed me Magog coming against Israel. This was Passover. And they looked up and they saw these huge alien spaceships. And they turned on each other and started killing each other. Now keep that one in mind. Now, like I said, a few weeks ago, God started giving me the interpretation of that Charleston Greenville dream. But I went to bed without the full understanding. But when I woke up out of my sleep, God gave me a vision. And here's the vision that he gave me. Guys, he showed me a map of Damascus. Now, in this vision, I was like an angel. I was flying around in the air. So I wasn't on the ground, but I wasn't way up in the air either. I was just high enough, kind of like a drone. I was just high enough to see the outline of Damascus. And he pinpointed this one site, and he showed me this building. And he said, this is a building being used by Hezbollah. And he told me that the Israelis and the Americans wanted to take this building out. Now, what they had decided to do was because they kind of knew or figured or assumed there were going to be massive tunnels underneath this building because it was a Hezbollah headquarters. And they wanted to take out the tunnels as well as the building. So they had decided to use one of these, what you call those things, bunker busters or something like that. It's one of the missiles that goes deep down into the ground. They had decided to use one of those. But for whatever reason, I don't know if it was lack of availability or lack of training or what, but for some reason the Israelis were not able to shoot that kind of missile. So they asked the Americans to do it, and an American pilot was sent on this mission. But here's what God told me. He said nobody knew. Not the Israelis, not the Americans, nobody knew that there was a small stockpile of WMDs underneath this building. And when this pilot went on the mission and shot that missile, and here again, y'all, they were only trying to destroy the building and the tunnels. They had no idea these weapons were there. But when they shot that missile, kaboom. I don't think I need to tell y'all how many people died from this attack. It was a lot. But God told me in this vision that this was an accident. It truly was an accident. In other words, the timing of this was out of their control. So go back to the first dream with the Charleston and the Greenville that I was telling you about. When God started giving me the interpretation of that dream, He started with the water that was coming in through the ceiling of the house. That was the one thing I could not figure out. Why was this water coming through the ceiling? If this had been a massive tsunami, the houses would have been gone, not just wet. And then he started talking to me about the evacuations in the dream. He said they evacuated because of a massive hurricane. And then I went, oh, I get it now. Y'all, it wasn't until Hurricane Helene came through here and went through Greenville the way it did that I began to realize this is what he was talking about. Not only was Hurricane Helene a time marker, but it was also giving me the interpretation of this dream. God was using hurricanes to get people off the coastlines because of an impending attack that's coming on America. And he's trying to get as many people away from the coastlines as possible. The ones that'll listen anyway. These people cannot rebuild without something else coming along and hitting them. And y'all know that hurricane season around here, it starts as early as June. So, we don't get much of a break with hurricane season. We go from June all the way to November with hurricane season. So, God's already shown me there's going to be more. I just don't know how many more and when. Okay? So that's why he was showing me Greenville, and he was showing me that whirlwind of water. He was showing me how bad it was going to be, and that he was using the hurricanes to evacuate people. All right? And then in the scene where the father and son are playing in the nuclear fallout, I'm going to explain that part later when I get into Gog and Magog. And then I was back at the house, the second house that was vacant, and my bags were already packed, meaning we were already gone. So here's what God was showing me about Damascus. I've told y'all that Gog and Magog will happen 3 different times according to the scripture. One at pre-trib, one at post-trib, and one after the millennial reign. And we know this because there are 3 different endings to the 3 different wars. All right? After the millennial reign, the bodies are burned with fire. At the second coming, the birds are eating the bodies. But at the pre-trib attack, the bodies are being buried with flags. He took me to the pre-trib Magog attack, and he broke it down even further. He said there are going to be 3 different attempts on the first attack. So at the pre-trib Magog attack, they will try it. Magog will try to hit Israel 3 different times. Okay, so looking at the pre-trib Magog war, the first of the 3 Magog wars, we're going to break that first war down into 3 different attempts. Okay, now Jesus is going to stop Magog 3 different ways on these 3 attempts. The first attempt at Magog to go after Israel is kind of what we're seeing right now. Iran and Russia are threatening in the background to attack Israel. God is going to use this accidental explosion in Damascus to destroy the Magog attempt the first time. The Magog group is going to try to regroup, and they're going to try to figure out what's going on. But once they find out that it was an American pilot who accidentally hit the stockpile, and of course they're not going to think it was an accident. They're going to think we did it on purpose. This is when they will come after America. But this is also the same time as the rapture. So what's going to happen is that Russia finds out it was an American pilot. They come over here. They attack America. While America is crippled, they go after Israel a second time. And this is when the rapture will happen. The volcanic explosions go off in the mountains of Israel, the earthquakes, the floods, all that. And that is how Jesus stops the second attempt by Magog to hit Israel, is at the rapture. They're trapped in the mountains of Israel. They get destroyed. And America is crippled in the process. Now, the third attempt, I'll explain here in a minute, but let's stay right here at the rapture for a second. Go back to my other dream where I was talking to my brother and his wife, and they live in Tennessee. And I could not figure out why in the world these bullets were coming down and they were not hurting us. Well, I think I found the answer. Our nuclear stockpile is in Tennessee. Either they make them in Tennessee or they stock them in Tennessee. I'm not sure. And one of the places that got hit was Memphis and Nashville, Tennessee. And I thought, okay, all right. I'm starting to get the picture now. If this attack happens right at the rapture, maybe the reason why the bullets were not hurting us in that dream is because I was talking to my brother and his wife after they died in the attack. And I was the first one to greet them when they died. And Jesus had sent me there because we were already gone by this time. Jesus had sent me there to talk to them and explain to them what was happening and that they had died and that America was under attack, that kind of thing. I'm pretty sure that's what God was showing me. I then went back and I listened to Henry Gruver, Philip Barnett, David Wilkerson, and Dimitri Duduman. And I took their visions and dreams and I put them together with my visions and dreams. And I made a picture. God told me to make a map and put all the attacks on the map of the United States. So I did. And this is what it looks like. As I was staring at that picture, God gave me a vision and He started drawing on the map of the United States. And this is what He did. And as He was drawing, He said, I am. So after all this stuff began to settle down and stop, they had to start burying these bodies. And they went and buried these bodies for, it says 7 months. Okay? Now, here's where the third attempt comes into play. Because after the 7 months, the Magog groups have had time to regroup themselves. They've had time to settle down. Now you got to keep in mind that America's also going to send nukes to Russia and Ukraine and all that, so they're going to be hit too. They're going to suffer loss just like we are. So they've got to have time to regroup. All right. After the 7 months would take us to the springtime of the following year, when the Antichrist would show up. So the following spring is when the Antichrist would show up. And I think the reason why I may have seen the father and son playing baseball in the nuclear fallout in July is because the Antichrist showing up in the spring would represent some kind of normalcy being brought back to the earth. And this is why he would be so widely accepted. The Sunnis and the Shias are going to turn on each other. And this is how God is going to stop the third attempt of Magog coming against Israel. The sighting of the spaceships is going to signal the arrival of the Antichrist. I believe the Sunnis and the Shias may fight against each other because they actually hate each other. I think they're fighting over which faction is going to actually bring in or usher in the Antichrist. God told me that there are people here in America who truly love him with all their heart. They believe in him, they worship him, but for whatever reason, they got deceived about the rapture. It's not that they love this world more than they love Jesus. They just got deceived about the rapture. They were never taught about the rapture or whatever, or they don't know much about it. And this is God using the nuclear attack to take some of his people home who may not have been ready for the rapture, but he still doesn't want them to go through the tribulation period. Several years ago, God gave me a prophetic word, and in that prophetic word, he told me that California, New York, Florida, and Nevada were going to be destroyed in 1 hour. And that's pretty much what a lot of other people have been saying. But he also showed me another one that's going to hit that I don't think anybody else has mentioned. At least I haven't found anybody. The one I saw in my first dream I told you about with the hurricanes. I saw a bomb. Well, I saw the aftermath of a bomb that had gone off out in the Atlantic Ocean. And it was somewhere along the eastern seaboard between South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia, somewhere in there. And this thing had caused such a massive tsunami, it wiped out the coastline. It wiped out the coastlines as far north as I could see and as far south as I could see. And this is why in my dream, when I looked back, I realized I was standing on an island in the middle of the ocean, and it had been disconnected from the mainland.